As a marriage therapist, the number one reason I see couples fight when they come into my office is actually a surprise to most people. And here's a great spoiler. There is a way to resolve this conflict once and for all in your marriage. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. I'm Cameron. I'm a licensed therapist, and this is my channel, Modern Marriage, where I share all the tips and secrets that I've learned from working with couples in therapy so that you can start building the marriage that you've always wanted. Okay, so what's the number one reason that couples fight that nobody actually knows about? It's really simple. It is that spouses tend to assume that they're more similar to each other than they actually are. I know it sounds like something that should never be a problem. I mean, why would we assume someone else works the same way or thinks the same way as we do? But psychologists have known that we do this, all of us, for a really long time. So long that it has a name. It's called the false consensus effect. And basically it means that if we don't know something explicitly about someone, so whether that's a belief they have or some certain way their brain works or a way they perceive the world, then we just assume that they work and think the same way that we do. And unfortunately for couples, this false consensus effect actually causes a lot of unnecessary conflict in marriages that could be avoided if we weren't making these assumptions about each other. So let's look at a few examples. Number one, on average, women tend to be more empathetic than men. And by that I mean most women are really good at looking at people's subtle facial expressions or their tone or their body language or other nonverbal ways of communicating, and can actually tell what that person's not only feeling, but probably what they're thinking and then what they need in that moment based on those thoughts and feelings. And oftentimes women are also really good at adapting their own emotions in order to respond to someone else's emotions in the moment. I personally believe, along with a lot of evolutionary psychologists, that this is just because our brains as women have evolved to take care of infants. So if you've ever interacted with a very small baby well before they're ever able to talk or really communicate what they need, you have to be very in touch with those nonverbal parts of their communication, namely they're crying, they're cooing, they're laughing, whatever it is, in order to be able to give them what they want in that moment. So if you're relying on language all of the time in order to be able to help somebody, you're not going to be able to help an infant very well. So women have evolved as the primary caretakers when you're pregnant and when you're breastfeeding particularly, to be able to respond to people's needs even when they can't actually tell you what it is that they want you to know. So the way this translates into a lot of conflict for couples is that women will subtly give their husband signs that they're displeased, that maybe they're tired of their husband not taking out the trash when they ask him to, or they're feeling really frustrated with their husband's tone some night. They're giving off these subtle signals to their husbands that something's wrong. But unfortunately, a lot of the times men just don't pick this up, and it's not a choice. It's not that they're trying to ignore the signals. They're just not primed to recognize those signals in the same way women are. And so what ends up happening is a man will often not realize that his wife is super upset until she starts yelling or crying. And at that point, she is already so frustrated that he doesn't know she's upset, that she has had it and oftentimes not interested in continuing the conversation. Whereas on the flip side, the husband will think, why did my wife just blow up out of nowhere? Why is she overreacting to such little things? It seems like she is so emotionally volatile. And he might even make the mistake of saying that to her. So it's not that the wife or husband are wrong in this situation, it's just that their brains work differently. And it's really hard to understand that someone else's brain might work differently from our own unless we've had a lot of intentional conversations about it. But I'll get into more of that in a second. Okay, second example. Women and men's brains change incredibly when a baby comes into the picture, particularly when the wife is also the biological mother. So she carried the baby to term, gives birth, and then now you guys have this new precious newborn child, and everything is going to change. So not only is mom probably a little bit more empathetic than her husband, just on average, because she has evolved to take care of this baby's needs, even though the baby can't tell her what he actually needs, but also her brain is being constantly rewired and primed to bond with her child because she is getting a constant flood of oxytocin, the feel-good hormone, especially when she's breastfeeding, when she's cuddling her baby, even when she's looking at photos of her baby, her brain is releasing oxytocin all of the time. And this is one of the big ways our brain rewards us for certain behavior. As a result, women often become near obsessed with their babies. They want to be holding them all the time. They want to be taking care of them. They want to know where their babies are at all times. And when a baby cries, not only is the mom's brain primed to respond immediately and try to give the baby whatever they need, but they actually also often start producing more milk when a baby cries in order to be able to provide that child with what they need, which is probably food, because let's be honest, a lot of times when a baby cries, it's because they're hungry. Whereas dad, on the other hand, he does get oxytocin releases as well when he's holding his child, but it's not the same process. And he also didn't benefit from 9 months of carrying his baby and having those brain changes associated with pregnancy that his wife had. And so the way this shows up in conflict for couples is that when a baby comes into the picture, when the mom gives birth, a lot of the times women get really frustrated that their husbands don't know what to do with the child, or don't act as interested, or don't act as totally overwhelmingly in love with their baby as moms are. When in reality, as women, we get a lot of hormonal advantages, a lot of evolutionary advantages that make it so easy for us to love our kids that dads don't really get when the babies are super young. And so again, this is not about the wife being wrong or the husband being wrong. It's about our brains being very different, particularly when a newborn baby comes into the picture. And so a little bit of understanding, a little bit of grace offered to each other that you're both doing the best you can when the baby comes along. And just because you approach caring for your child differently probably means that your brains work differently and you're seeing the situation differently. And that's actually very good, because babies need a dad and a mom. Babies are in their best environment when they have both parents present, and that comes with 2 different ways of parenting. And so if dads are able to ask for guidance where they need it from moms and try to be involved and try to support their wives as much as they can, and if the wives can let go of a little bit of that control that we all naturally feel like we need to have. We want to be in control of our baby's environment and protect them. But if we can let go of some of that control and give it over to dad, he's going to be much more likely to want to be involved. Now for the last example, we all tend to assume that our spouse's emotional, physical, and psychological needs are very similar to our own. So we assume that when we feel stressed, we want to connect and we want to be close with our spouse, that obviously our spouse would feel the same way, that we need to be there for them and try to get them to talk about what they're going through. When in reality, a lot of the times, spouses will have different ways of dealing with stress, for example. So some people, a lot of women in particular, are connectors. When they're stressed out or when they have a problem, they want to go connect with somebody who's close to them, particularly their spouse, versus men, on average, want a little bit of space. And this isn't always the case. Some men are serious connectors and some women need a lot of space when they're stressed. But on average, women tend to reach out when they're stressed in order to better cope with the situation. And men tend to want a little bit of time to problem solve on their own, decompress, and just spend time alone thinking through their problems, or even just sit next to their spouse and not talk about the issue. And then later they can talk about it once they feel like they've calmed down a little bit. So the way this often translates to conflict in couples is, for example, husband comes home from work, he's really stressed, and his wife is asking him over and over to open up about what's going on. She says, look, I know you're upset. Obviously, I can tell in your face. I can tell, in your tone of voice, back to that empathy. And he says, I don't want to talk about it. Please just give me some space. I really am not in the mood. And she will often translate that as him being upset with her, when in reality, he just needs a minute. And if he could have that minute, if he could have that space, then he would get what he needs in the moment and come back and want to talk to her about it later. But the couple often ends up fighting, and then they come to therapy and she says, why does he never want to open up to me? Does he not trust me? Why does he get mad at me when I try to reach out to him? And the husband says, I don't know why she can't just give me my space, why she doesn't recognize that when I'm stressed, I just need time to myself. Okay, so what's the solution to this issue? How can you make sure that you're not assuming your spouse is more similar to you than they actually are, and that's then leading to conflict in your marriage? It's really simple. You just get to know each other more. It's actually very similar to what it was like for the two of you when you first started dating. So if you think back to the early days of your relationship, your early dates were probably spent doing fun things together and asking each other a lot of questions about the other person, because you didn't know anything about this person that you were falling in love with. You just knew that you cared about them and you wanted to get to know them more. And it's the same thing at any point in a marriage, that for whatever reason, at some point we assume that we already know our spouse as well as we need to, and we don't need to keep asking questions to get to know them better. When in reality, we're all changing all the time. We're all super complicated. And that means that we have to keep asking our spouse questions to get to know them better. We have to keep being curious about the parts of the person we married that we don't actually know that well yet. So a great way to do this is to try to replicate what the early part of your dating relationship was like. So you go out on dates and you have a list of questions that you want to ask each other, and you just dive in. So I call this 20 questions. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't have to be 20 questions on any given date, but you're going out doing something fun together and trying to get to know the parts of your spouse that you may be making assumptions about. And it's probably helpful to start with the areas where you guys are fighting the most. So here are some examples of some questions to get you started. Number one, what is the most effective way for me to ask something of you so that it doesn't come across as critical or demanding? So it's a communication one. Number two, what helps you relax most after a stressful day, and how can I help you relax? Number three, what are your favorite things to do with the kids, and what do these activities mean to you? Number four, what does your career mean to you? How has it helped shape your identity? And number five, what are your biggest communication pet peeves? Like eye rolling, yelling, a certain tone, timing of criticism, name calling, stuff like that. And what about these things is so hurtful for you? So one really big tip here is that if you're going to play this game with your spouse, which I really recommend doing if you guys have been having a lot of conflict lately, is that you have to play the game with a spirit of non-defensiveness, meaning that when you are asking the questions, you want to come into it totally curious, totally open, and avoid being defensive at all. Because chances are, if you're starting with areas where you guys are having conflict, you're not going to love some of your spouse's answers because they're going to be different than your own. That's the whole point of playing the game. Your answers are not going to be the same. But if you get defensive, if you respond by being upset with some of your spouse's answers, that's essentially punishing the person who's opening up to you for being honest, for being vulnerable. And that's going to make it really hard for you guys to keep opening up to each other in the future. So you really want to embrace this as an opportunity to learn a lot about each other rather than try to explain your own point of view or respond defensively to whatever your spouse's answers are. Okay guys, that's all I have for you today. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, all geared towards helping you improve your marriage. And please leave a comment on this video if you do try out this 20 questions game and how it went for you and your spouse. I'm Cameron, and this is Modern Marriage.